Hello, this is Algi, and I'm going to explain how the Baatezu and the details will make your dungeons be way more believable. Let's start by having a map. We're going to make a very simple adventure with 4 locations. Village, that's where the party can prepare and rest, etc. A hill, that's where the bad guys will be. And the 2 locations are connected by, there's a path with a bridge on it, and there is forest with a path on it. So you can go like this, or you can go like this, both ways, but you cannot get from the forest to the bridge because that's where the river is, right? We're going to choose our monsters, and Baatezu will take the monsters, and based on them we'll make this map feel way more lived in. Based on their threat level and their abilities, I want to have hobgoblins on the hill, basic default hobgoblins. And just for funsies, so that they have another creature to interact with, let's put pixies in the forest. Let's go through the tables of the Baatezu, and we're just going to look up the monsters in each table and see what Baatezu tells us to do. So first of all, let's check the meta consequences. Meta consequences are basically adding more monsters if you want more monsters. Here's hobgoblins, hobgoblin, because in the master manual there's a chapter for the hobgoblins, and we are choosing the default hobgoblin creature in it. The name in the parentheses is the name of the stat block. So we have a couple of columns here: commander, teammates, minions. Commander usually means that if there's a creature here, then we either have to add it, not necessarily accessible to the party, but somewhere in the game world, or have an excuse why that creature isn't there. But here it says maybe, so we don't have to do either. We can just leave it out. The default hobgoblins are maybe commandeered by a hobgoblin captain and or a hobgoblin warlord. Now we don't need to do anything, but just because to add something interesting, let's choose hobgoblin warlord, and we will excuse why the hobgoblin warlord isn't there. So let's put an empty warlord tent on the hill. Teammates, these are monsters that usually fight on the side of hobgoblins. Let's choose a couple just to make it more interesting, that it's not only hobgoblins, but they are mixed together with other kind of creatures. Let's say we can add ogres. So let's add ogres. Now these notes are not how you should take notes for adventure writing. I'm just writing down to show you how many details we have. Evil humans, and which lists all the NPCs in the monster manual. So let's add the spy. And obviously the spy will be in the village, right? That's why it's a spy. Minions are the creatures that can be commandeered around by our main default creature. We could add bugbears and goblins under them, but let's not do that. These were the meta consequences of our hobgoblins. Now let's check for pixies. Now pixies aren't in the meta consequences table because they don't have any meta consequences. Now it seems at first that this is in alphabetical order, but actually the creatures are in the same order as in the monster manual. So monsters in alphabetical order, then miscellaneous creatures in alphabetical order, which means most animals, and NPCs in alphabetical order. So it's easier to find anything because you don't have to worry how I phrase them, which letter to use for alphabetical order. It's the same order as in the master manual. We already have a couple of creatures. The next part is the physical consequences, which are the physical clues that they leave around. Let's check the hobgoblins first. Here it is, hobgoblins, hobgoblin. First of all, we can check the most specific. The environment column adds the most specific, which cannot be categorized, it just is. Based on the description of the monster, fortifications. These hills are fortified, let's say with palisade victims. That means that if we want to place dead victims of this monster, then these are the injuries that the victims bodies will have. It says weapon, which means that the hobgoblins use weapons most of the time. Let's keep it simple and have them use their default weapons, which is a sword and arrow. Let's have a dead villager with slash injuries. Now, where should we put the dead villager? The way monsters work is that they have a base. The hobgoblins have a base on the hill, pixies have a base on the forest, but they also have a territory where they hunt, where they prey, where they walk patrols, etc. I say that the pixies' entire territory is in the forest, and the hobgoblins will have a territory that overlaps the forest and the bridge. So let's put a dead villager on the bridge. The dead villager will have injuries from sword. We can add some interesting tidbits here. So the following skill checks might be useful to investigate the injuries of a corpse. Intelligence Arcana check can help identify force, necrotic, psychic, and radiant damage. We don't have those. An intelligence investigation check might be the most useful here. The character could find out how the victim died exactly. So let's say we have an int investigation check to learn that tried to flee but was cut down. Wisdom medicine check can identify any kind of damage but not necessarily inform about their source. With med check to learn that it's a slashing injury. So let's get back to hobgoblins. Okay, next, the first two columns are the most important ones. We have their bodies are biological and their technology is high. High tech means they have access to the same technology as the party. They can have chainmails, swords, and they are biological creatures, which means that they are not magical, they are not celestial, they can be categorized in the animal world basically. Now biological means that they will leave behind clues based on 3 or 4 very basic activities. Let's check them. We have metabolism, we have reproduction. They won't reproduce here. They can be damaged, injured, and they traverse. But there's an effect that of their technology. High tech means that their biological clues will be more organized. A dog, for example, will leave behind clues on trees and other places, and it will eat an animal if in the forest if it finds it. But a hobgoblin is high tech, which means that many of their biological activity is focused on their base on the hill. Let's start creating. Okay, metabolism is 2 activities, so let's have a cauldron with food. They are this militaristic organization, so they obviously dug a latrine for themselves. They don't have offspring here. Damage. Injuries can have different levels that they get, but let's keep it simple here. A dog can leave behind its fur, but a high-tech creature won't just leave behind its fur everywhere. But what will happen is that their equipment might also get injured, so they can leave behind broken items. Now, let's say that there was a fight on the bridge. One hobgoblin was injured, so let's put bloody chainmail links on the bridge. So there was a fight, one villager died, and that means that there's a survivor in the village. Next is traversing. So they leave behind prints, paths, tunnels, etc. And here we also need to think about their technology. They are high tech, which means they will have combat boots. So they will have a lot of combat boot prints, bridge, combat boot prints lead to heal. And in the forest we have combat boot prints that lead to heal. This is the effect of magical body and high-tech equipment. Okay, now let's look up the pixies. They leave behind pixie dust. So in the forest you will find pixie dust. They are high-tech. They are not magical, they are fae, so they are otherworldly creatures, which means that we are not thinking in physical cause and effect. We're thinking about narratives, how a fae appears in a fairy tale. The pixies are like being harmed by these hobgoblins and ogres. Let's have a very dramatic scene, a battlefield where the slain pixies are dramatically lying with their tiny swords in the ground. Now we also have ogres. Yeah, we have ogres. They have weapon. Like if we have a small map like this, then we don't need to have all of these words leave a clue, but this will be useful. This amount will be useful if you have a larger map than this example. Then you can even have multiple clues left by one aspect. You can either have the same aspect leave different clues that might be logically combined by the players to find out which creature it is, or you can use repetition as an artistic tool. So the deeper they go into the dungeon, the more brutally murdered victims they find. For example, you can use these aspects in different ways, any way you want, just adding more details to every location. Just add more details to every location. At least one detail to every location. One detail is enough. One detail in every location is enough. We are adding multiple details because that's what I like to do right now. So they are low tech and biological, which means they are biologically similar to the hobgoblins, but they are low tech, which means that they might leave behind clues way more than the hobgoblins. For example, if we think about their metabolism, they eat, so they not necessarily will eat from the cauldron. They might go to the forest and eat an animal. Like let's put a half-eaten animal corpse here, and also giant prints. Let's check out the spy. So we have the spy. The spies, their victims are. So let's have in the village a dead villager with a bolt in neck. So if the players find that corpse, they might realize that there's a spy in the village. Biological high-tech clues are left behind, but in the village it's full of villagers, so the spy's clues will be hidden between them, but the spy needed to leave the hill and get to the village either through the bridge or through the forest. So let's have human boot prints hill to village, from the hill to the village. So if they find those with a perception check or a survival check, they can realize that there's a spy in the village. Okay, let's check the next table, which is about information, the news of the monsters. So let's check the hobgoblin civilization column. This is about what kind of news the civilization has about the monsters. It says constant conquest, prioritize elves in attack. Villagers, constant conquest, that means that the villagers might have heard that other villages were raised by the hobgoblins. Villagers heard about hobgoblins raising villages. They prioritize elves in attack, so what we can do is we can make this dead villager on the bridge an elven, and we can make the survivor human. Claim lands with abundant resource in and they do reconnaissance. We are already on this. They will be attacking the pixies for their forests, obviously. We should add to the village abundant resources. Full, larder, lot of crops. So they want their crops to eat in the winter or something like that. There are survivors. Now this column, the survivors column, means what added injuries survivors have. It's empty, which means that the survivors will only have the injuries from the other table. This survivor might have the human survivor might have an arrow wound that's healing. So from this survivor, the party can learn about the hobgoblin attack that happened on the bridge, and from the villagers, they can learn about the neighboring villages that have been raised. That's the hobgoblin. Now let's check the ogre. They raid and loot mundane things. So we can add to the news about the village that we heard that they not only stole all the crops from the village, they even took their boots for some reason. Because these ogres just like boots, like they are legendary stupid. They even took the boots, and we had the boot collection on the hill for the ogres. They eat and skin humanoids. Favorite foods are dwarves, halflings, elves. Now we can either decide that okay, then this corpse was eaten by the ogres, and then the party won't be able to find these clues, or we change the injury to bite injuries, or we can say that no, the hobgoblins didn't want the ogres to eat this corpse, or the ogres weren't here when the hobgoblins killed this elf, while the ogres can eat animals in the forest. It's our decision. Now I will decide, because I think it's more interesting. I think it's more interesting and less gruesome if the party finds a dead elf who was slain with a sword than a half-eaten or a skinned elf, right? If I wanted to write a horror adventure, I would go with the ogre skinning and eating the elf, but we want a light-hearted fantasy adventure here, so let's keep the hobgoblin injuries on the elf. And that was the ogre. We need to check the pixies and the spy. So let's remember that ogres are legendary stupid. This is in the neighbors category. Neighbors means that this is how they interact with their neighbors. So they are legendary stupid, which means that their neighbors will, the neighboring creatures, the pixies in this occasion, will try to use that. And luckily, pixies have in the neighbor column harmless tricks played on travelers, which means that it might not be that harmless if they are at war, right? So we can have some kind of vicious pranks played on the ogres. For example, we can have an ogre, a lost ogre in the forest, still looking for his nose, right? Because they made that trick where you steal someone's nose, and he was so dumb that he believed it. You can find one isolated ogre should be easier to defeat than a bunch of hobgoblins and ogres. The party might decide to kill him or capture him, interrogate him, so that might be an interesting tidbit. Harmless tricks played on travelers is also in the civilization column, because that happened to the villagers too. Villagers think forest enchanted. And the helps column says yes. This means that the monster can typically use to help the party. We can add another source of information. The pixies, they are flying creatures, so they should be able to give basically all the information about the ogres, where they are, the numbers, and the hobgoblins. So pixies have a lot of strategic info. You just need to find the pixies in the forest, which isn't as easy as one might think. And we have the spy. Now we have a civilization column. It infiltrates society. It was common sense, but it's still in the table, which means that we can put it in the village. The spies, their clues won't be obvious because they can be mistaken for the clues of the villagers. Technically, a friendly spy could be helpful. This is not a friendly spy, so if they will ask the spy will have misinformation, misinforms. This is not the notes for the adventure. These are just lists of the details. This is not even an adventure at quest. We don't have a story, we have nothing. We just have locations. We just put monsters on locations of the map, and the Baatezu in the details gave us all these details to make the dungeon more believable. This is already playable, this is exciting, this is interesting, even though we haven't written anything yet. We didn't put any effort into this. We just looked up tables and added whatever was in the table on the map, and this is already very interesting. It's full of details, it's very believable. The players won't be blindsided by the hobgoblins, by the ogres, by the pixies. This is how the Baatezu in the details will help you make your dungeons be more believable.